Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Fred Hayes, Apollo 13 from the States. Wishing I could be closer, even in person, for the celebration 50th anniversary, since we flew that mission back in 1970. Kind of auspicious with the current circumstances we have around the world. Our mission the week before our flight had a great challenge and threat of a virus. We had all been exposed by Charlie Duke, who had gone to a birthday party with his son, to German measles, which is a virus, although I'll have to say not near as threatening as the one the world is dealing with today. Nevertheless, though, it caused us within the crew a traumatic incident. We were all exposed, and through the blood work and testing, it was determined that Ken Manningly, the primary crew command module, which Jim Lovell and I had worked with through a previous whole crew assignment, Apollo 11. We were the backup on Apollo 11. And here we were already going 13, and Ken was replaced. The decision was made 2.5 days before our launch that Jack Swigert would replace Ken. So that was a very traumatic decision, and kind of took away for me a little bit of the excitement of going with that, just seeing how distraught that was. I knew for Ken to have worked that hard to get to this point and then be pulled off at the last minute. But anyway, just should have known then that Apollo 13 wasn't going to be exactly the normal mission.
Wonderful.
So anyway, have a happy time, everybody, and I hope this your internet works out on the web to have this gathering.
Thank you so much, Fred. And once again, thank you so much for taking time. Do look after yourself and your wife, and enjoy your 50th anniversary, however you're going to be able to do it.
Likewise, everybody else, take care of yourselves.
Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I'll talk to you sometime soon.
Okay.
All right, that was lovely. I spoke to him earlier this morning, and I've met him once before at Space Fest, and a lovely gentleman. And I think a few of the people on this session have actually met Fred and would attest to that. All right, so let's get started. Tonight's program is going to start off with, I'm going to do a little thing about the explosion events, what happened in regard to that and how it all transpired and the timelines. Then we're going to hear from Colin on the Australian Space Network and Comms Network. Then we're going to hear about Honeysuckle Creek, Apollo, that manned space network from John and his experiences on Apollo 13. And then we'll go over to Mike for Australia, Honeysuckle Creek, Apollo 13 mission support, tracking challenges, and also we'll hear from Bruce Window. Now, Colin, John, and Bruce, you don't know yet, but I'm going to introduce you in the next couple of slides, so just relax. And also, Mike, we're going to look at John Feast's real-time Apollo in real-time page and project, and it's incredible. We're going to have some Q&A, so once again, if you've got questions, put them in that chat box, and we'll have a look at them toward the end. And as I mentioned, I did do this interview last night or this morning with Fred. I only played a couple of minutes of the greeting that he sent to us, which was lovely. But I also did about a 35-minute interview with him, and it's a really nice interview. So if you're still up and about and conscious, I'll play that at the end of this session. All right. So my name's Peter. Let me introduce myself. I'm the president of the Space Association, and we're a space and spaceflight interest group here in Melbourne. That's our website. So if you want to find out more details, have a look at that. So the speakers, Colin McKellar, he's a former geologist, but he's now turned to an Anglican minister in Sydney. And he grew up the Apollo area, and as it says on the screen, he now runs the absolutely amazing honeysucklecreek.net website, which if you haven't been there, give yourself a month, just dig into it. It's quite incredible. This is the page here. you see those links on the left. It started off just being about Honeysuckle Creek and has now expanded out dramatically to other stations, the early days, what's going on. And I see someone's got a beer there going, that's good. And different missions, etc. So there's obviously a big section on Apollo, but there's also a lot of the other deep space and manned space flight tracking things in there as well. So get onto it. All right. I'm just going to see if I can do something here. No, I won't do that. Yeah, okay. All right. So next slide is, so that's the URL there for honeysucklecreek.net. So do yourself a favor, as Molly would say. Next, we're going to hear from John Saxon. John was the operations supervisor at Honeysuckle Creek at the tracking station here. He supported all the Apollo missions at the operations console. And John also spoke to John Young and Charlie Duke on the lunar surface to see if he gets time, he might tell you about that. He wasn't supposed to, but he stepped in and had to fill in the gap. Then following that, we'll have Mike Dinn. Mike, his early career in avionics and aircraft flight testing. He then became the deputy director at Tibb & Biller. And then he also did the surveyor while he was there. And then he moved over to Honeysuckle Creek when it was established and became the deputy director in '67. Mike has got lots of stories. He covered all the Apollos from 7 to 13. So we're going to hear a lot from Mike. And then we're also going to hear from Bruce Window. Bruce was at the Weapons Research Establishment as a technician at the National Mini-Track Satellite Tracking Station in Woomera. And then he moved over to Operations Supervisor at Tibb & Biller for deep space and manned space flight missions from 65 to 75. He supervised the manned space flight operations at Parkes as well, so we'll hear about that. So let's have a look at the time and what actually was happening. We're celebrating 50 years, so when was that in Australia? So it was actually 4:13 tomorrow morning here in Australia at the 12th of April, although it was the 11th of April in the US. The explosion happened at 1:08 on the 14th. So mark that in your calendars. And then we had the splashdown next Saturday on the 18th at 6:07 a.m. So pause and mark that on your calendar and have a think about Apollo 13. All right, I'm going to now play a quick little video which Colin McCullough supplied to me. This came from, well, it's the launch TV from Apollo 13. It was the only time, I believe Colin is correct, the only time they mounted a colour TV camera at the top of the tower for the launch. And I believe it was identical technology to what they used for the colour TV on the moon in space. So let's play that now.
We'll be looking for an ignition of those 5 first stage engines at the T-minus 8.9 second mark. We've passed T-minus 30, T-minus 25 seconds and counting, and Apollo 13 is go. T-minus 20 seconds, T-minus 20 seconds and counting. 17, guidance release, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13. The Saturn V building up to 7.6 million pounds of thrust, and it has cleared the tower.
So once again, Colin getting in there and getting some unique footage, etc. All right, so I'm going to now spend a few slides looking at the explosion background itself to sort of understand. We've all seen the movie and it kind of brushes over a little bit, but I thought hopefully you might be interested to see a bit of detail about how it actually transpired. So the key dates in this whole scenario started back in March the 11th, 1968. So 2 years before the actual flight took off. Then in August of 68, there's another key event which we'll go through. October the 21st, 68. So a lot of stuff happening in 68. So the seed was set. And then March 25th in 70, which for people who are familiar with the mission, that was before the launch itself. And then, of course, the actual explosion took place on April the 14th in Australia. So let's have a look at 1968. 1968, the March 11th was the assembly of that oxygen tank, the actual serial number of the tank at Beach, which is the company that built it. So there was nothing that needed to be done. So all was looking good at that stage. So then the oxygen shelf itself, so that's a shelf. So there's a tank and then there's a platform on which it sits and that gets bolted in. So that was installed on the 4th of June in 68 into the service module for service module 106, which was going to fly Apollo 10. Testing, everything worked fine, no anomalies noted. Everything's tickety-boo. In August, they decided, because of some testing they'd done on the cryogenic tank domes in earlier spacecraft, that they decided they were going to make a modification and replace those tanks, make the modification. So they're going to take that out. So they decided to replace that with the approved modifications later on. So October 21, that was on the key dates, if you recall. The shelf was removed from that service module. That was the Apollo 10 service module for the required modification. It was taken out and it was actually going to be used for later spacecraft, which turned out to be Apollo 13. After various lines and wires were disconnected, bolts were removed and the fixture suspended from a crane was placed under the shelf to lift it out. Now, I've highlighted it. One shelf bolt was mistakenly left in during the final, during the initial attempt to remove it. And as a consequence, after the front of the shelf was raised about 2 inches, the fixture broke, allowing the shelf to drop back into place. So they photographed it, they had a good look at it, they thought everything was fine, and they think it may have struck the underside of the shelf during this time. But they investigated and they didn't think there was any problems. They believed that everything was fine. It's simply been dropped back into place. And analysis they performed based on those forces of a 2-inch drop. However, it seems likely now, after we know what eventually happened, was that it was first accelerated upward and then dropped. And this is very significant. So the remaining bolt was then removed. The instrument recorded. The shelf was removed without further difficulty. Following the removal, the oxygen shelf was retested to check the shelf integrity, including the approved pressure test, leak test, etc. All the visual inspections revealed no problem, so they thought they were tickety-boo. These tests would have discovered any external leakage or serious internal fluctuations, but did not disclose fill line leakage within tank number 2. So that is significant, as we'll find out later. So here's a diagram of the service module, and these are the various fixtures that you can see that they use to install and remove. So there's the oxygen tank and the oxygen platform, and the fixture that they use to put that in and remove that. Now, subsequent to the accident, they went back and looked at the photographs that they'd taken of the service module for Apollo 10, and they actually realized that there was some damage. You can see at the top there, that circle, at the top of the shelf, which was above the oxygen platform, which indicated that, yes, indeed, the top of the tank did hit the bottom of the shelf above, setting the scene for what transpired later on. So this is looking down at the top of the tanks there in that shelf that I was talking about. November the 22nd, the shelf passed test and was installed in 109, which is Apollo 13. So they'd taken that out. That was the one that they had the problem with. They tested it, everything was fine. They tickety-boo and they put it back in. They put it into Apollo 13, I should say. Apollo 10 had already had theirs. So that on the bottom left-hand corner is the tank itself with the red box, and the right-hand side is the X-ray sort of look at the internal workings of the oxygen tank itself. The investigation board, after the accident, of course, happened to determine that the probability of the tank damage from this accident was low, but it was possible the loose fitting fill tube might have become displaced by the drop. Now, the loose fill fitting didn't cause the explosion, but it sowed the seed. So they're thinking that what happened was that after the thing happened, they think that the actual fire started at these wire bundles down there, and we'll find out why later in a few slides. So we move into 1969. The whole processing for 13 is progressing nicely. The service module and command module get to the Kennedy Space Center on June the 26th, and they start all the assembly and together, pre-flight testing, altitude chambers, the whole deal. The lunar module then arrives this 27th and 28th of June from New York. The Saturn V vehicle itself, it's actually started the assembly. There's the first stage at July 20, and the stacking is happening. July 20, 69, pretty significant date, but they were still working on the next missions coming up after 11, of course. 31st, they completed the stack of the Saturn V stages. August of 1969, they announced the crews for 13 and 14. Obviously, August is after the July landing. And they also announced where they were going to be landing on the Frau Mara region, which is indicated on the arrow there. So the prime crew was, as we know, Jim Lovell, Ken Mattingly, and Fred Hayes. The backups were John Young, Jack Swigert, and Charlie Duke. All right, so everything's happened in 69. The vehicle's all stacked. Everything's looking great. The crews are assigned and the location's set. Then up pops January the 4th. Tom Paine announced that the cancellation of the final moon landing mission, Apollo 20, due to the budget. That sounds familiar. The schedule for the remaining moon missions would be stretched out, lengthening the intervals between flights from 4 to 6 months. So then January the 7th, the first change, then moved the Apollo 13 mission from March the 12th to April the 11th. All right, now we fast forward to March the 16th. And I assume most people might be familiar with the countdown demonstration test. Essentially, it's a rehearsal of all the steps that lead up to the actual launch. So there's two phases of the wet phase and the dry phase. The wet phase includes all the fueling of all the vehicle, etc. And they go right down to T-minus 8.9 seconds. The crew is not on board at this stage in the wet rehearsal. So they began with the loading of the kerosene. Then on 16th, after they've recycled back to 24, T-minus 24, they drained all the fuel, and then they get the crew out and go through all those suiting procedures, getting the command module, do everything that would happen on launch day down to -0. So there's the three guys getting ready. And then one of two significant events happened in the Apollo 13 processing. The first one was on the 25th of March. Engineers pumping super cold liquid in the first incident of the countdown. 3 security guards parked their patrol cars near a ditch where the engineers dumped the excess liquid oxygen nearby the launch pad at 39A. Normally this didn't cause a problem, but on this particular morning, the wind was very calm and the oxygen fog formed in the area where the guards had parked their cars. What could possibly go wrong? When one of the guards started his car, the spark from the ignition caused the oxygen fog to catch fire, consuming that car as well as 3 others. And there's a picture. How many you go with your insurance claim on that one? Anyway, you can see that bit of damage there. Fortunately, there was no one injured, and they halted the test, drained the lines, and no one suffered any injuries, which is quite amazing. But they didn't park the car at that location any longer. All right, so that's happened on that last day there. Now, the second incident, the more significant incident, happened on the 25th as well. Far-reaching consequences. And it began during the wet phase of the countdown demonstration test. When the engineers attempted to partially drain the oxygen from the two service module tanks, one tank emptied normally, but tank 2 only emptied to by about 8%, possibly due to a problem with the fill line, as we found out later. Managers decided to continue with the countdown demonstration test and return to the oxygen tank after the test was completed. The 26th, the day after the countdown demonstration test finished, engineers returned to that oxygen tank and tried to work out what was going on, attempted to vent the remaining oxygen. They attempted another normal detanking. Tank 1 behaved properly, tank 2 didn't. So they next attempted to boil off that oxygen. You probably heard the story, but they using the heaters and the fans in the tank and powered them using the 65-volt ground support equipment. They finally emptied that after 8 hours and 5 heater cycles. What was not known is that the switches in the tank's heater circuits were rated only to 28 degrees, 28 volts, I should say, in the spacecraft. So obviously the voltages were way out. The switches were designed to open the circuit when the heater reaches 80 degrees. So if it got above that, it was supposed to cut up. But of course, what happened, because of the higher voltage, the switch fused and locked it down, so the cutoff didn't happen. So the temperature continued to go up and up and up. The result of that was that they believed that the Teflon insulation around some of the wiring in that tank was damaged. They didn't know at the time. They decided it wouldn't be necessary to replace the tank. It would have caused a big delay, and they didn't want to do that. Everything seemed to be tickety-boo. So the seed was set. Okay, the other little drama, and Fred mentioned it in his video before, April the 9, he was the backup crew member, command module member. Charlie Duke contracted rubella from a friend of his son, exposed to the prime crew members to that. Of all of them, only Mattingly was not immune. And this is interesting, I found this out. Normally, if a crew member of a prime crew had to be grounded, the remaining crew would also be replaced and the backup crew substituted. But because of Duke was on the backup crew, they couldn't do that. So consequently, they only ended up replacing Mattingly with Duke, with Swigert. So that happened a couple of days before the launch. So a bit of drama there. And that's a press conference where they announced it. Okay, so a few things had to happen. Of course, you've got your Saturn V rocket, you've got your lunar module, and you've got your plaque that's going to land on the moon. It's got Ken's name. So we have to go ahead and change that. So they hastily had a new plaque manufactured. But the thing's out on top of the launch pad under that cone underneath the command and service module. How do you get to it? Well, they thought of everything. There's a hatch you can see in the bottom left-hand corner on the cover above the covers of the lunar module. And in fact, they access it all the time to put in late equipment and etc. right up to the launch date. So that wasn't unusual that they go in there, but obviously they had to use that access for this. So basically that little door there is on the side of the spacecraft, you can see. And this gives you an idea of the tight squeeze in there. They had to erect special access platforms and squeeze in and unscrew the old plaque and put the new one in. So nice bit of a drama there. So the seed was set. So before the launch, the engineers filled up the tanks and everything was fine. The damaged insulation was there, but it was actually pretty dangerous even it stood on the launch pad, but they didn't know that. And they had actually done some cycling of those as well. So they stood cryogenic tanks. But anyway, that's a picture of them about to climb up and get into their rocket for launch. And of course, April the 11th launch day, they walk out to their van and off they go to the launch pad and had a beautiful launch. Now, we've all seen the movie, and we all know where Ken was at the launch, right? He had a really good parking spot right beside the launch pad, and he watched the launch right up close. He had to sort of step back a little bit. Well, not exactly, as we probably all realise. Ken was actually at Mission Control in Houston during the launch itself, and that's Joe Kern, who was a Capcom at that stage. In fact, Joe was a Capcom for large portions of the mission. But all was not lost. Ken actually was very disappointed, and as Fred in his video mentioned, he was pretty gutted that he didn't get to go on the Apollo 13 mission. But of all the people that won and lost out of 13, I think Ken got the best deal. He ended up flying Apollo 16 and doing extended orbits around the moon, and did a deep spacewalk between the Earth and the moon on the way back after the landing. So he had a very unique experience, one of only 3 people that have actually ever done that. So good on you, Ken. He stayed with the space program, and in fact, he had 2 shuttle flights as well in June to July of '82 as commander of STS-4, and also January 24. I think I've got the end date for that on STS-151. All right, I'm just about finished with my section, but I did find, and Mike will talk about this later on. This is John Feast's amazing Apollo in real time. I was hunting around for some particular information about some communications, and I came upon this little gem. I thought you might enjoy it. It only goes for about 2 minutes. Oh, sorry. You have to listen closely. So this is a network in the control room and around the world.
Have any data at all from either command module or LIMS?
This is just for about a half an hour before entry interface of Apollo 13.
If you look at channel 20, you'll see that's 63 by Guam. Question mark? Fismer network on cord. Yeah. We're just talking about the Go ahead. Yeah, but hey, Ernie.
Yeah.
Did you copy that call from Building 48?
Yeah, but there's no air conditioning in the second floor VIP room?
That's firm.
Yeah, we copied that. That's okay.
Well, there's nothing taking smoke out of it. You get a bunch of people in there smoking your lungs.
Okay. I'll pass on to the second floor VIP room monitor that they ought to watch the smoking in there because there's no circulation. Hey, listen, would you tell Eddie to go ahead and throw both of the switches, the TV switches for the commercial TV, both the flight director and the FISMR? He can go ahead and throw them now rather than entry interface.
Okay.
Some people don't seem to think we can do it.
Who's some people?
Huh? I can't repeat the names right now. They're in the room.
Okay. Okay, and you're going to take it upon yourself to make sure the fire alarms don't go off in those 2 rooms.
Raj.
Okay.
Okay.
You're being taped.
Okay.
I don't know about you, but I thought that was really amazing. Like we had 35 minutes or so before they're about to re-enter the atmosphere, and they're having this conversation. So fantastic. Oh, well, that's the end of my little session.